Welcome to Distress Tolerance session 2. So first of all, just before we get started, we're going to just take a moment to think about, okay, how can I get the most out of this session? How can I get my brain to focus on what I need it to and learn as much as possible? So we're just going to check out what our position is. So sitting upright, alert. It's a much better chance of our brains staying focused on where we want them to. And then just adjusting how we're sitting, becoming aware if we need to make any changes. So scanning from the top of your head to the tips of your toes. Is there any part of your body that needs to move or adjust in any way? Do you need to stretch? Is there anything else that you need with you to do this session? So having a pad and a paper is always handy. And for this session, you're going to need the Marsha Linehan worksheets and handouts. So it's going to be handout number, so she's looking quickly, 7 and 8. And it's going to be worksheets 5 to 5B and worksheets 6 to 6B. Okay. So just pause the video and get yourself all ready before we start. So in this video we're going to be looking at Wise Mind Accepts and Self-Soothe the 5 senses. And just want to really quickly recap and emphasise about why we might be doing distress tolerance skills. And so if we think about it, it's for times when we're in a crisis. It's for when we need something quite immediately, when we want to take the edge off very intense emotion that's getting in the way of us accessing our wise mind. Because ultimately what solves a lot of our intense emotion problems is problem solving and emotion regulation. And that's ultimately what we're aiming to do. But sometimes our emotions are just too high to access that, or other times there's very little we can actually do because there is a time factor involved. So what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to find a way of just taking the edge off, being able to access our wise mind and being able to tolerate the situation until we can do something else with it. But first, the science. Just want to look at why this is so important, that we look at how to manage our emotions, how to tolerate distress. Okay. So I'm pretty sure that you're all familiar with the flight or fight response. It's that response that happens automatically in the face of threat, in the face of danger. And what happens is we get that immediate rush where all the blood is going to pump around our hearts, our digestive system shuts down, our muscles tense, everything about our body gears up to either fight something or to run like mad. Okay, always my favourite position. So normally what would happen with that flight or fight response is it would flare up. We would either fight or flee, and then that response would come back down again, and our digestive system would start up and running, our muscles would become much more relaxed, we would become much more relaxed in ourselves, our heart rate would go back to normal, we would stop perspiring, sweating, and all of our system would come back to its normal balance. However, if that flight or fight response is being activated multiple times over and over again, what we get is a very extreme response. So it's like everything gets accentuated. So we get our increased heart rate, but it's happening a lot, so it might lead to panic attacks. Our muscles feel like they're continually tight, like it's really hard to remember a time when your muscles aren't tight. Our digestive system shuts down so totally that we find it really hard to even think about food. and our thinking goes offline, because when we're in our flight or fight response, what happens is that thinking capacity, that reflective capacity we have, is not needed in that flight or fight. We are focused on the threat, and that is the only thing our brain is concerned with at the time. That means it's really difficult to access your wise mind and to think clearly. Quite frequently we feel very disorientated, very disorganised. It's really difficult to feel like we have much control over our lives. We feel constantly overwhelmed. And because of that, because we're in that flight or fight focused on the threat, we also come across as being very, very defensive. So we're on the attack most of the time. And we're hyper alert because we're scanning our environment all the time to find out what might be coming next, which means that we become very, very restless. Hard to sit still in that time where you feel like you just can't sit still. And it would sort of make sense, wouldn't it, that if all of that was going on, then you'd get really irritated by other things. And that might build up and lead to these uncontrollable bouts of rage, which pushes people away and also overwhelms other people. So what I want you to do is I just want you to pause, and I just want you to note down how many of those things you think apply to you. And then note down how many times is that happening for you a day? And how many times does that happen for you a week, approximately? Because then what I want to do is I want to look at the other side of that. So the body can only sustain that extreme flight or fight response for a certain amount of time. As soon as it thinks that the threat is even slightly subsided, it goes into a slump mode. So it's almost like you go from 100 to 0 really, really quickly. And your system shuts down, but it shuts down in a different way. It's shutting down to conserve energy because you've used a lot of energy. In that state, you often feel completely exhausted. Very, very tired, very lethargic. It's really hard to have any motivation to do anything. And you can appear like you're lifeless to other people. It's really difficult for people to connect with you in any way because you're sort of just focused on conserving energy. And because you're focused on conserving energy, that leaves you very vulnerable because you feel quite helpless. It's like all the fight's gone out of you. So literally the flight or fight has gone out of you. Okay. And when that happens, you sort of have difficulty then setting boundaries with other people, and because you just sort of automatically obey. You're just on automatic pilot. You don't express much. You feel quite numb. Really hard to work out what emotions are going on. And something quite big happens, it's really hard to have a reaction to it. And that means your emotions are quite constricted. And over a period of time, that leads to isolation, depression, dissociation. And so then what I want you to do is I want you to just think about, okay, of what I've said and what you read on the slide, how often is that happening for you? How often does that happen in a day? How often does that happen in a week? What is the effect for you? Just take a moment to jot it down. And then what I want you to do is I want you to focus on these arrows. Because if we don't interrupt this cycle, if we don't do something different, this just keeps going round and round and round and round, and we move from flight or fight to slump to flight or fight to slump. And what we want to be is here. So what we want to do is we want to be able to come out of that flight, fight, slump, and we want to have regulated emotions, because when our emotions are regulated, when they're sort of at a balance, then we're able to think logically. Our brains go back online again. Our head feels clearer. We're able to make wise-minded choices and decisions. And our interactions with other people change because we're able to make eye contact, we're able to communicate, we're able to show how we feel, and we are much more aware of what's going on both internally and externally around us. We end up feeling much more grounded, as if we're more in control, we have more power. And that's a really lovely place to be. It also means we have more chance of developing a much more stable sleep pattern, which in itself helps us become more regulated with our emotions. So how do we do this? Let's look at the next slide. So I want to introduce our friend, the vagus nerve, who's a bit of a wanderer. Okay, so the vagus nerve starts at the base of our brain and it connects to pretty much every internal organ that we have. And what it does is it communicates between the brain and the body, backwards and forwards. So it sends messages to our brain. And the important message that we want the vagus nerve to send to our brains is to chill. Turn off the flight or fight, everything's fine. That's what we want the vagus nerve to communicate. Because when we don't need that flight or fight, when there's no actual threat, when what we're feeling does not fit the facts, then what we want to do is we want to be able to activate the vagus nerve so that it tells our brain that actually it's okay. This is massively important because this affects so many areas of our body. So for instance, when you were thinking about that cycle, were you also aware that sometimes you don't breathe and swallow properly when you're in that flight or fight response? Do you sometimes feel like it's sort of choking? If you activate your vagus nerve and you shut off that flight or fight response, and suddenly you find you can swallow again. It also affects your hearing. Your hearing's better when you're relaxed. You're able to taste more when you're relaxed. Your digestive system works so much better when you are relaxed. So therefore you're not getting as many health problems that are associated with that. And your bladder movement, your bowel movements, all of those sort of things connected to your digestive system and how food moves up and down our body, all of that starts to work better. So what do we need to do? Well, we're going to have a look at those two skills of wise mind accepts and self-soothing. Also, I want to remind you of distress tolerance 1 as well, because the other things that activate the vagus nerve are intense exercise, paced breathing, singing, laughter. These things we can access pretty quickly, and we can activate that vagus nerve and shut off that flight or fight response. Start to access our wise minds. So the other thing that activates the vagus nerve is self-soothing. Now, self-soothing can seem like quite a strange concept if you're not used to doing it. And sometimes when people have spent a long time in their lives not self-soothing, when they start doing it, it can bring up difficult feelings. Sometimes people might feel guilt, or they might feel shame. They might feel that they're being selfish in some way by paying attention to themselves. This is such an incredibly useful skill to have and build upon. It's really important. We need to find a way around this. So clearly one of the first ways of addressing this would be to do fitting the facts with guilt and shame. The other thing that you might want to do is look upon this slightly more pragmatically to get a bit of a distance from those feelings. That actually these self-soothing skills are practical life skills. These are things that successful people use in order to navigate through life well. It's a very, very effective way of managing distress. And what's so important about managing distress is that it stops us from making those situations worse. Sometimes we make those situations worse by making things unpleasant for other people, don't we? So if you have a capacity to self-soothe, that means that actually you're not being selfish at all. You're really taking care of yourself so that you can also be mindful of your relationships with other people as well. So just pause for a moment and just think of all the good reasons that there might be to experiment and learn some self-soothing skills. And then let's look at what we need to do. Okay, so what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to look at all our senses. And we don't have to do that individually. Sometimes those senses combine. So one of the things I'd really like you to do is to just pause this video and grab hold of some moisturiser, something that might smell nice. Doesn't really matter how much it is. I've just got a little small tube here, so I'm going to show you how this works. Okay. Now you've got that, I also want you to have a look at handout number 7. I'm just going to check this, it might not be 7, in which case you're going to be filling out the wrong handout, aren't you? So let's have a look. Yeah, it's really good that I checked that. It's handout number 8. So get handout number 8 out, and what I want you to do is I want you to go through handout number 8 and I want you to tick all the things that you do already. And then when you've done that, I want us to just focus on each of these areas. So these are our senses, and quite a number of people, this vision is a very strong sense. So let's look at what we can do with that. Sometimes having an image on your phone that makes you smile can really help with vision, because you're wanting something that feels soothing. Smiling at an image is really helpful. I have a video on my phone of the ocean, so that also keys in with not only vision but also hearing as well. So sometimes if I need some time, I can just play that and it brings that sense of relaxation to me. There are other times I might think, actually I just want to look at something that makes me laugh, and fortunately lots of people send through funny comments or clips, or there's usually quite a lot on Facebook that you can access. Choose your favourite ones. Another really interesting one is to think about buying yourself a single flower, because this can also tick a lot of boxes. Not only can you look at that flower, but also if you choose a scented one, you can smell it. And that can become even more pronounced if you have a herb plant or a plant that smells, where you can rub the leaves. And then you've not only got vision and smell, but you've also got touch as well. When you rub those leaves, the smell becomes greater. What that's doing is it's bringing you into that present moment. It's grounding you. The other one here is looking at taste. Now, if you're going to taste something, do it mindfully. So it may be that you think, actually, you know, it'd be really nice to sit and have my favourite hot drink. That's quite soothing in itself, isn't it? Because you've got the touch, you've got the warmth of the cup. Do it mindfully. Make that cup of tea or coffee mindfully. Really smell the aroma of it. Hold the cup. It might be you're not a hot drink fan. It might be that actually a cold drink's better for you, or it might be that eating something is much better for you. Now, sometimes if you're in a high state of arousal, then it's really difficult because your digestive system's shutting down. So sometimes licking something helps, because it's just bringing you back into the here and now, and it's just activating that vagus nerve so your system's calming down. So I'm just going to go back to hearing. Sometimes there are favourite tunes we have, upbeat, so definitely don't go for anything melancholy, because otherwise you're just going to do that slump. Wanting something upbeat and cheerful. If it's on loud, it's harder for your brain to focus on what it's afraid of. It automatically wants to go to the sound. Think about different smells that you might like. Sometimes just having like one of those little sample pots of like an aftershave or a perfume in your bag can really help, because you can just sort of rummage around for that and just bring it out and just put some drops on. So having these things readily available is essential. Preparation is key here. Thinking about all the things that you want to have readily to hand before you have that flight or fight response is really essential. And one of the easiest ways of doing this is using a moisturiser. So if you take your moisturiser that you got earlier and you put a little bit on your hand, okay, and I just put this with this, okay, and so what you're going to do is you're just going to very gently and slowly rub it in. And as you do that, you can just press gently against your skin and just notice what that feels like. And as you're doing this, then I just want you to be aware, can you smell the aroma of that moisture just sinking into your skin? How do your hands feel? Are they cold? Hot? So we're also combining touch, aren't we, with smell. What's that like when you do that? If you wanted to, you could also combine that with your paced breathing. There's a really good exercise where you just trace your breath up and down the finger. So your breath in, your breath out, in and out, in and out, just to regulate your breathing, do some paced breathing. So all of these things can be combined. So don't think when you're trying things out that you have to stick with something that's set. Combine things. Think about, what can I do that's going to hit as many of my senses as I possibly can. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is just pause again, and read through that handout again and tick one from each section that you're going to try this week. And when you've got your list, look upon this as an experiment. This is a skilled practice experiment. You're going to try the things that you've ticked, and you're going to assess how successful or effective they were. And then you're going to look at, do I tweak these at all? So for instance, you might have picked up a moisturiser It was lovely for your skin, but didn't really smell very nice, or didn't smell at all. So you might want to think about, oh, is there a different moisturiser that I want to get hold of here? You might have bought a flower and it was very, very beautiful, but it didn't last very long. So you might want to think about, okay, so what flowers last longer? And where do I position this flower so I get the most out of it? So for instance, I have one in the corner of my kitchen, so I can see it as soon as I come down in the morning. And I can just stop and just pause and look at that flower. You might want to prepare a music list, things that would be really good to listen to that you can just put on instantly. So the key here is to have things instantly accessible that you have prepared in advance, so that when bad times happen, you have the resources immediately to hand. Okay, so we're now going to look at distracting with Wise Mind Accepts. So the clue is in the title, in that actually what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to be able to access our wise mind. And distracting is a good way of doing that, and distracting is also a good way of relaxing, which activates our vagus nerve. It's like win-win. And the caution here is distracting only lasts for a short amount of time and should be used sparingly. And it's those times when we don't want to make the situation worse, when we're wanting to take the edge off our emotions, or when we know that the difficulty we've got is time limited. We need to be able to tolerate something for a certain amount of time. And these techniques give us space so that we can start regulating our emotions and problem solving. Okay, so the first one is activities. So I want you to have a look at handout number 7. When you look at handout number 7 and that category, I want you to just look at the things that you do already. Tick the ones that you do already. Now, it can be quite hard when you're in a high emotional state to think about the activities that you might be able to do, but what you're wanting is something relatively accessible that you can do quite quickly. So going out for a walk is tops. Getting yourself out of the situation that you're in comes top of the tree, because by changing your environment, your brain has to adjust to that, so it automatically causes a distraction. Exercise is a great one. So walking, running, cycling, all of those things really, really useful for distracting and for activating our vagus nerve. It might also be one of those phone your friend situations. Now, sometimes I feel like you're in two minds about that, because on the one hand you do want to contact somebody, but on the other hand you feel like you don't want to get into a long conversation. So preparing a few things that you could say in situations like that can be really useful. It might be, just thought I'd give you a call, don't know if you've got any spare time, but it'd just be really helpful just to literally talk about anything at the moment. I just need to distract myself for a bit, and I'm more than happy to do the same for you if the feeling takes you that way too. Have a list of things that you know that you could do quite quickly without having to analyse and think a lot. Next one is contributing. So have a look on that list now. Tick the ones that you already do. When we contribute, when we pay attention externally to what might be going on for somebody else and we pass on a kindness, that might only be doing something as smiling and opening the door for somebody. Or it might be letting somebody go in the queue in front of us. It might be saying thank you to somebody in a shop or something like that. It doesn't really matter what it is. It can just very, very small, But the science shows us that the more we contribute, the more we do things externally for other people, the happier we feel. So it's one of those areas which increases our happiness levels. It's also great for distracting, because if you can sit down and do something that you know may have some level of meaning for somebody else, then you are distracting yourself from what's happening at that time. Comparisons. We all do it, but we don't quite like it sometimes. It makes us feel a bit uncomfortable, doesn't it? Sometimes we think, oh, we shouldn't compare ourselves to other people, because it feels like in some way we're pleased that they're having a worse time than we are. And that's not the case at all, is it? It's just a way of distracting ourselves. And it's a way of coming up with something that allows us to move away from what's going on for us. And sometimes you can do that by just using fiction or TVs, films, things like that. So comparing yourself to something like, I don't know, Tower Inferno, or what's it like, Ice Age, something like that. And thinking, you know, I mean, if I ever watch Ice Age, I just think I'm so pleased I'm not in the freezing cold. It might just be something small. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's certainly not about you taking pleasure in somebody else's misfortune. It's more about thinking about, how can I distract my mind onto something else? How can I make a comparison with something that makes me more able to tolerate the situation I'm in? And emotions. So when you're distracting yourself with your emotions, what you're aiming to do is you're aiming to access a different emotion. So if you're feeling afraid, laughing produces a different emotion. It's not easy to do, but laughter yoga is great for doing things like that. So there are actual exercises that you can do where you're practicing laughing from your belly, or just feeling really daft, or there might be a video that you watch that always makes you laugh. You're trying to access an emotion that's opposite to the one that you're feeling at the moment. So if it's intense sadness that you're feeling, and you know that actually at this moment in time you cannot allow yourself to completely go with that sadness, you need to distract yourself, then you need to access a different emotion. And that emotion will need to be something that involves you getting a bit more tense. So doing something where you sort of give yourself a bit of a fright, so it might be watching a horror film or something like that, will produce a different emotion. So when you're thinking about distracting yourself with emotions, it needs to be something that's opposite to the one that you're feeling at the moment. So again, just have a look on that list. Tick the ones that you already do. Pushing away is about creating a distance from the sensations that you're having at that time. And there are lots of different ways of doing this. Have a look on the list at the moment, see if there's any that you do. Sometimes if you're pushing something away from you, a really good way of doing that is to use a visual exercise, where you imagine whatever you're feeling or whatever's happening, you imagine pushing it away, as if you can see it moving away from you, as if you're looking at it from like a video screen, you know, or a camera lens, where you're zooming out. So you're getting some distance from that image or from those sensations that are impacting on you. Another way of doing that is to imagine putting all of those things in a box on a shelf, and allowing, just saying, I'm just going to put it there out of reach, like I'm going to bracket it off, and then I'm going to go back and have a look at it later date. And here's the thing, you can't just leave it on in the box, because if you leave it in the box forever, I can tell you now, it is going to come back and bite you. So this comes into this distress tolerance skills as you're doing it so that you can function in that moment. The other thing you can do is have a bit of a bargain with your brain. You can come up with a bit of a negotiating tool, and you can say, you know, if you're getting a lot of thoughts that are coming in and a lot of sensations that are coming in, you can say to yourself, okay, I am going to sit and think about this at, I don't know, 8 o'clock tonight for about 15 minutes. So I'm going to bracket that off until now, and I'm going to have a bit of a bargain with my brain going, okay, so if I promise that I'm going to look at this for 15 minutes at 8 o'clock, then I want you to allow me to focus on something else in this moment. Now you do then need to look at this at 8 o'clock for 15 minutes, because otherwise it's just going to keep intruding. And actually it also fits in with what we're saying about distress tolerance, is this is not the answer. Problem solving, emotion regulation techniques are the answer. So what we're trying to do is just not make the situation worse. So it's the same sort of technique with thoughts, in that we're wanting to distract our mind with different tasks that it has to think about. So things like counting, puzzles, colouring in, word searches, all of those things are really good because your brain has got to focus on that. I know somebody who does maths puzzles, and that works really, really well for them. So they just have a book that they just automatically get out and do those maths puzzles. It might be that what you're doing is you're trying to think of different things to focus on. So for instance, I like photography, so I would go on and edit some photos, whether they needed editing or not. Or I might do some searching on a family history site to see if I can find any more of my ancestors. Now, it's unlikely that I am going to find any more of my ancestors, because trust me, I have searched a lot. But it doesn't really matter, because the act of going on the website page and having a look for that means my brain has then got to focus on it. So it's finding things that your brain has got to focus on rather than what's intruding at that time. And the other one is sensations. So this is what makes up the accepts. When we're having a high extreme emotional response, we're going to have a lot of sensations going on in our body. We're going to be feeling maybe very, very hot, or maybe very, very cold. We might be feeling quite tense. We might be feeling like it's really difficult to swallow. We might be getting churning sensations in our stomach. All of those things that are going on, we can find different sensations that will distract our body and our mind. So one of the easiest ones is like smell and taste. So I don't know about you, but Olbas oil always does it for me, because oh my goodness, that stuff stinks, and brings you back into here and now really quite quickly. Same with sucking on a lemon, has the same effect. If that's too much, grapefruit, lime, anything like that. Or it might be like a fizzy sweet, because that will get your taste buds tingling. Again, it just brings you back in the here and now. If you're really, really hot, then something very cold. So even just opening the freezer door and taking out something cold and holding onto it will do it. If you're really cold, investing in a hot water bottle is a must. So you can just fill the hot water bottle up and cuddle that. Sensations are very similar to our self-soothing, in that we need to attack our senses, but we're doing it in a slightly different way. So it's a bit like with the music. Music needs to be loud, not so much that it damages your eardrums, but it needs to be loud, so we're distracting with it. So we're not soothing ourselves down with it, we're distracting it. We're giving our brains something else to hold on to, rather than what we're going through at the moment. So now we've had a brief chat about that, I want you to just have a look again at that handout. What I want you to do is I want you to go through it, and I want you to tick something from each section that you haven't yet tried. And when you've done that, I want you to prepare to experiment with that this week. Evaluate it. Think about, do I need to tweak it to make it a bit more effective? Is there something else I could add on to it? Is there a way of combining some of the accept categories so I'm addressing several things at the same time? Have a play with it. Okay, so this is the part where I emphasise practice, practice, practice. So what we're after here is deliberate practice, not things that you just sort of fall into or just happen, where you're preparing for those times where your emotions are just going to feel a bit out of control, and where you're thinking, okay, so what can I put in place that's going to be instantly accessible so I can use immediately? And then practice, practice and practice and practice at times when your emotions are not at full throttle. Because if you can practice then and you know what to do, then you can automatically do it, because having a bit of a think when you're in your flight or fight mode about what your best self-soothing technique is just not going to happen, because your brain is focused on the threat. You need to have something accessible to you. Okay, so you can do this.